The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning while I was eating cereal in my cramped studio apartment. Margaret speaking, I answered automatically, not recognizing the formal voice on the other end. This is Jonathan Hartwell from Hartwell and Associates. We represent the estate of Patricia Williams. Your presence is required at a will reading this Friday at 2 p.m. My spoon clattered into the bowl. Aunt Patricia was dead and nobody had told me. 5 years of silence from my family, 5 years since they threw me out like garbage for refusing to marry their business partner's son. Now her lawyer was calling me. My parents would be furious seeing me there, but I had to go. Walking into Hartwell and Associates felt like entering a cathedral of mahogany and brass. The receptionist, a woman with silver hair and kind eyes, directed me to conference room A. My heart hammered against my ribs as I pushed open the heavy door. There they sat at the polished table like royalty holding court. Robert Williams, my father, wore his expensive charcoal suit and that familiar expression of barely contained disgust whenever he looked at me. Linda, my mother, had perfected her society smile, the one that never quite reached her calculating eyes. They both turned as I entered, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. What is she doing here? Robert's voice carried the same contempt that had echoed through our house during those final terrible months before they cut me off completely. Linda's manicured fingers tightened around her designer purse. This must be some mistake. Patricia wouldn't have invited her. I chose a seat across the table from them, my hands trembling slightly as I smoothed my department store dress. The contrast between my simple black outfit and their $1,000 ensembles couldn't have been more obvious. For 5 years, I'd worked double shifts at a downtown laboratory, barely scraping together rent money while they lived in their mansion hosting charity galas and country club events. Jonathan Hartwell entered precisely at 2 p.m. carrying a leather briefcase that looked older than I was. He was a distinguished man in his 60s, with steel gray hair and the bearing of someone who'd spent decades delivering life-changing news. Behind him walked a younger woman with auburn hair pulled into a neat bun, carrying a stack of documents. "Thank you all for coming." Hartwell began settling into his chair with practiced efficiency. Before we proceed, I must express my condolences on the loss of Patricia Williams. She was an extraordinary woman who built something remarkable from nothing. My throat tightened. Aunt Patricia had been the only family member who ever encouraged my love of science. While my parents pushed me toward business school and suitable marriages, she would spend hours explaining molecular structures and pharmaceutical research. Her laboratory in the basement of her house had been my sanctuary during high school, the only place I felt truly understood. Patricia's will is quite specific," Hartwell continued, opening his briefcase. She spent considerable time ensuring every detail reflected her exact wishes. Robert leaned forward, his wedding ring catching the afternoon light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "We appreciate Patricia's generosity over the years. She was always good to the family business." "Indeed," Linda added, her voice honey-sweet. "We're prepared to honor whatever charitable bequest she's made and handle the transition of her assets responsibly." I wanted to disappear into my chair. They spoke as if Patricia's death was just another business transaction, another opportunity to expand their real estate empire. The woman who had patiently taught me organic chemistry and encouraged my dreams deserved better than their cold calculation. Hartwell's expression remained neutral as he withdrew a thick document bound in blue legal backing. Patricia Williams, being of sound mind and body, made the following provisions for her estate. He cleared his throat formally. "To my beloved niece, Margaret Williams, I leave my entire pharmaceutical company, Williams Biotech Industries, including all assets, intellectual property research facilities, and ongoing projects. The words hung in the air like smoke. My parents' confident expressions frozen mid-smile. I felt the blood drain from my face as the magnitude of what I'd just heard crashed over me. Furthermore, Hartwell continued, his voice steady and professional. I leave to Margaret my primary residence at 15 Oak Hill Drive, all personal belongings contained therein, and the sum of $50 million in various investment accounts. Robert's chair scraped violently against the floor as he shot to his feet. That's impossible. Patricia wouldn't leave everything to her. His face had turned an alarming shade of red. She's just a stupid girl who couldn't even maintain a relationship with her own family. Linda's carefully constructed composure cracked like thin ice. There must be some error. Patricia promised us that Margaret wouldn't inherit anything significant after the way she behaved. I assure you there is no error, Hartwell replied calmly. Patricia was very specific about her intentions. My mind reeled as I tried to process what was happening. Williams Biotech was worth over $1 billion. Patricia had built it from a small research lab into one of the most innovative pharmaceutical companies in the country. And she'd left it all to me. This is ridiculous. Robert slammed his palm on the table, making the water glasses jump. Margaret walked out on this family. She refused a perfectly good marriage that would have benefited everyone. She hasn't spoken to Patricia in 5 years. That's not true, I whispered, finding my voice for the first time. I tried to call Aunt Patricia after I moved out. You told me she didn't want to hear from me. Linda's laugh was sharp and bitter. Don't play the victim now, Margaret. You made your choice when you decided you were too good for your family's plans. Hartwell cleared his throat, drawing attention back to the document in his hands. There's more. He turned the page with deliberate slowness. Patricia also left detailed instructions for Margaret regarding the management of Williams Biotech, including recommendations for key personnel and strategic direction. I thought about my tiny apartment, my second-hand furniture, the nights I'd fallen asleep at my lab bench because I couldn't afford to heat my place properly. All those years, Patricia had been building something magnificent, and somehow she'd decided I was worthy of inheriting it. How much is the company worth? I asked quietly. Current market valuation places Williams Biotech at approximately $1.2 billion. The auburn-haired woman spoke for the first time. I'm Sarah Chen, Mrs. Williams's financial advisor. The company has shown consistent growth over the past decade, with several breakthrough medications in various stages of FDA approval. Robert sank back into his chair, his face gray with shock. Linda stared at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Pure, undiluted hatred mixed with something that looked like fear. Patricia always said the people who hurt us most sometimes give us the greatest gifts, I murmured, remembering her last words to me 5 years ago. At the time, I'd thought she was just being philosophical about my family's rejection. Now I wondered if she'd already been planning this moment. Hartwell reached into his briefcase again this time, withdrawing a manila envelope sealed with red wax. Patricia's initials were pressed into the seal just like the letters she used to send me during college. Patricia specifically requested that Margaret read these private communications before we proceed further. Hartwell explained, sliding the envelope across the polished table. My parents leaned forward, their earlier shock transforming into something more dangerous. Linda's eyes narrowed as she watched me break the wax seal with trembling fingers. Inside were 5 handwritten letters, each dated over the past 5 years, written in Patricia's distinctive flowing script. The paper was expensive cream-colored stationery that smelled faintly of her lavender perfume. My eyes burned as I unfolded the first letter, dated just 3 months after my parents had thrown me out. My dearest Margaret. I read silently. I know you must be confused and hurt by recent events. Please know that I've been watching everything unfold, and I've discovered truths that will shock you. The letter went on to describe Patricia's growing suspicions about Robert and Linda's business dealings. She'd noticed discrepancies in the consulting fees they charged her company, irregularities that didn't match the work they actually performed. What started as mild curiosity had led her to hire a forensic accountant. I moved to the second letter, dated a year later. Patricia's handwriting was more urgent now, filled with anger and disappointment. She'd uncovered a network of shell corporations that Robert had created, funneling money from Williams Biotech into fake consulting contracts. The amounts were staggering, hundreds of thousands of dollars each month, disguised as legitimate business expenses. Your parents believed I was too trusting to question their invoices, Patricia had written. They were wrong. The third letter revealed even more devastating information. Linda had been forging my signature on documents, making it appear that I had authorized various financial transactions before my exile from the family. They'd used my name to open lines of credit, then defaulted on the loans, destroying my credit rating without my knowledge. But the fourth letter contained the bombshell that made my hands shake so violently I could barely hold the paper. Patricia had discovered the real reason my parents wanted me to marry Thomas Murphy, their business partner's son. It wasn't about family connections or social advancement. Thomas Murphy was deeply in debt, his family's construction business on the verge of bankruptcy. My dowry would have included access to Patricia's company, giving them the capital infusion needed to save their failing enterprise. "No, they never saw you as their daughter," Patricia had written in her careful script. "To them, you were always a commodity to be traded." The final letter was dated just 6 months ago, and Patricia's writing showed the slight tremor that must have come with her illness. But her words were crystal clear and filled with fierce protective love. "Margaret, by the time you read this, you'll know that I've left you everything. But more importantly, I hope you'll understand that I've spent these 5 years gathering evidence to protect you from people who would destroy you for profit. Your parents have been stealing from my company for over a decade. They've forged documents, created false business relationships, and manipulated financial records. But I have proof of everything." I looked up from the letter to find my parents watching me with expressions of barely controlled panic. They knew Patricia well enough to guess what secrets might be contained in those pages. "What does it say?" Linda demanded, her voice tight with anxiety. Instead of answering, I turned to the attachments Patricia had included with the final letter. Bank statements showing suspicious transfers, photocopies of invoices for work that was never performed, email printouts where Robert discussed selling Williams Biotech's proprietary research to competitors. "She documented everything," I said quietly, the full scope of their betrayal washing over me. "Every forged signature, every fake invoice, every lie you told about me." Robert's face went from gray to white. "Those are private business communications taken out of context." "Are they?" I held up a particularly damning email where he described me as a useful idiot who'll never figure out what we're really doing. The message was sent to Linda 3 days before they'd presented me with Thomas Murphy's marriage proposal. Sarah Chen, who had been silent during my reading, finally spoke up. "Mrs. Williams spent her final months providing our accounting firm with comprehensive documentation of financial irregularities. The evidence is quite thorough." Linda stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I don't have to listen to this character assassination. Patricia was old and sick. She probably imagined half of these so-called irregularities." "Actually," Hartwell interjected smoothly. Patricia was remarkably sharp until the very end. She insisted on having her mental competency evaluated by 3 independent physicians before finalizing these arrangements. All 3 confirmed she was of completely sound mind. I folded the letters carefully, my heart breaking for the woman who had spent her final years protecting me from family members who saw me as nothing more than a financial opportunity. Patricia had known she was dying, but instead of focusing on her illness, she'd been building a case to ensure justice would be served. "There's one more thing," I said, looking directly at my parents. "Patricia left instructions for me to share these letters with federal authorities if I choose to do so." The silence that followed was deafening. Outside the conference room windows, downtown traffic moved at its usual pace. People going about their normal Tuesday afternoon routines, completely unaware that my entire world was being rewritten one revelation at a time. Sarah Chen opened her laptop with the efficiency of someone accustomed to delivering financial bad news. The screen cast a blue glow across her professional features as she pulled up a series of spreadsheets that would shatter any remaining illusions my parents might have harbored about their situation. "Before we proceed with the transfer of assets to Margaret," Sarah began, her voice crisp and matter-of-fact, "there are several financial matters that require immediate attention." She turned the laptop screen toward my parents, revealing columns of numbers highlighted in ominous red. "Our forensic analysis has identified $15.3 million in unauthorized transfers from Williams Biotech accounts over the past 12 years. Robert's expensive tie seemed to tighten around his neck. "Those weren't unauthorized. We provided legitimate consulting services." "Did you—" Sarah clicked to the next screen, showing a detailed breakdown of supposed consulting work. "Because our investigation found that 90% of the invoiced services were never actually performed. For example, you charged Williams Biotech $250,000 last year for market analysis of European pharmaceutical regulations. However, the report you submitted was copied word for word from a publicly available industry publication from 2018. Linda's face had taken on a waxy pallor. "That's impossible. Robert spent months researching that report." "I'm sure he did," Sarah replied dryly. "It must have taken him at least 20 minutes to find the original document online and change the letterhead." The next screen showed bank records that made my stomach drop. Transfers from shell companies with names like Williams Strategic Consulting and Biotech Development Partners had been funneling money into Robert and Linda's personal accounts for years. "The most creative aspect of your scheme," Sarah continued, "was using Margaret's name on several of these companies without her knowledge. Her signature appears on incorporation documents filed while she was attending college 300 miles away." I stared at the forged signatures, each one a near-perfect imitation of my handwriting. They'd been practicing perfecting their ability to steal my identity along with Patricia's money. Furthermore, Sarah clicked to another screen. "You've been using anticipated inheritance from Patricia's estate as collateral for increasingly risky real estate investments. Your current debt-to-income ratio is approaching bankruptcy levels." Robert finally found his voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. "We were building wealth for the family. Everything we did was to secure Margaret's future." By forging her signature on loan documents, Sarah's eyebrow arched skeptically. "By destroying her credit rating with defaults, she never authorized your daughter currently has a credit score of 420 because of debts you incurred in her name." The number hit me like a physical blow. 420. No wonder I'd been denied for every apartment application, every car loan, every credit card I'd applied for over the past 5 years. I'd thought it was because of my low income, but they'd been systematically destroying my financial reputation while I struggled to survive. "There's more," Sarah said, pulling up a federal database that made Hartwell straighten in his chair. "The Internal Revenue Service has been investigating Williams Biotech's consulting expenses for the past 18 months. Patricia cooperated fully with their inquiry." Linda's hand flew to her throat. Investigated for what? Tax fraud primarily. The IRS tends to notice when a company deducts $15 million in fake consulting fees. They're also interested in the unreported income you've been hiding in offshore accounts. The offshore accounts. Patricia's letters had mentioned them, but seeing the actual bank records on Sarah's screen made the scope of their crimes undeniable. Robert and Linda had been living like millionaires while claiming middle-class income on their tax returns. "What does this mean for us?" Linda asked, her voice barely audible. Sarah exchanged a look with Hartwell before responding. "It means you're facing multiple federal charges: wire fraud, tax evasion, identity theft, and embezzlement. The Justice Department is reviewing Patricia's evidence as we speak." I watched my parents' faces crumble as the reality of their situation sank in. These weren't abstract financial irregularities anymore. They were looking at serious prison time. Patricia spent her final year working with federal investigators, Sarah continued relentlessly. She provided them with comprehensive documentation, recorded phone conversations, and financial records going back 15 years. She wanted to ensure that justice would be served regardless of family relationships. Robert slumped forward, his head in his hands. "She's dead. Can't we just put this behind us and move forward as a family?" "Patricia may be dead," Hartwell said quietly, "but her evidence lives on, and her primary concern was protecting Margaret from further exploitation." I thought about all the nights I'd worked overtime at the lab trying to save enough money for graduate school, the meals I'd skipped to make rent, the dreams I'd deferred because I couldn't afford to pursue them. All while my parents were stealing millions and living in luxury, using my name to cover their tracks. "How long have you known about this?" I asked Sarah directly. "Patricia first contacted our firm 2 years ago," she replied. "She suspected irregularities, but wanted professional confirmation before taking action. What we found exceeded her worst fears." Linda suddenly straightened, her survival instincts kicking in. "This is all speculation and circumstantial evidence. No court would convict based on the word of a dying woman with a grudge." Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the room, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Actually, Patricia was very much alive when she testified before the federal grand jury last month. Her testimony combined with the documented evidence was quite compelling." The silence that followed was profound. Outside, I could hear the distant sound of construction work, the normal rhythms of a city that kept moving regardless of personal catastrophes. But inside this mahogany-paneled room, my family was disintegrating in real time. "A federal grand jury." Robert's voice cracked on the question. "Indictments should be unsealed within the next 30 days, Hartwell confirmed. Patricia wanted Margaret to understand the full scope of what she was inheriting, including the legal battles that might follow." I looked at my parents, these people who had raised me and supposedly loved me, and saw them clearly for the first time. Not as authority figures or family members, but as criminals who had used me as a tool in their schemes while casting me aside the moment I became inconvenient. Patricia had seen it all. She'd watched them steal from her, lie to her, and manipulate me, and she'd spent her dying months ensuring they would face consequences for their actions. Hartwell reached into his briefcase once more, withdrawing a folder thick with photographs and surveillance reports. The cover was labeled "Williams Family Investigation" in Patricia's precise handwriting with dates spanning the past 6 years. "Before we finalize the estate transfer," Hartwell said, "Patricia wanted Margaret to understand the true circumstances surrounding her estrangement from the family." He opened the folder, revealing photographs that made my blood run cold. Images of Robert meeting with men in expensive suits outside downtown office buildings. Linda lunching with women I didn't recognize at exclusive restaurants. And most shocking of all, photographs of both my parents visiting Thomas Murphy's family construction office repeatedly during the months leading up to my exile. Patricia hired a private investigator after she began suspecting financial irregularities, Hartwell explained. What David Kellerman discovered went far beyond simple embezzlement. A professional-looking man in his 50s entered the conference room carrying his own set of documents. David Kellerman had the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades uncovering other people's secrets. The marriage proposal to Thomas Murphy wasn't about love or family connections. Kellerman began without preamble. It was a business merger designed to solve multiple financial problems at once. He spread photographs across the table like a dealer laying out cards. Murphy Construction was hemorrhaging money on a failed shopping center development. They needed immediate capital injection, or they'd face bankruptcy within 6 months. Meanwhile, he continued pointing to bank statements. Robert and Linda had over-leveraged themselves on real estate investments. They were counting on inheriting Patricia's money to cover their mounting debts. I stared at the evidence, my mind racing to connect the implications. So the marriage was never about me at all. Correct. You were the bridge between two failing business enterprises. Your marriage to Thomas would have given Robert legal standing to demand a larger role in Williams Biotech's management. Combined with the dowry they planned to provide from Patricia's expected inheritance, it would have solved everyone's financial problems. Linda found her voice, though it trembled with barely controlled panic. That's not true. We genuinely thought Thomas would make Margaret happy. Kellerman pulled out a recording device, old-fashioned but clearly functional. Patricia asked me to document everything. Would you like to hear what you really thought about Margaret's happiness? He pressed play, and Linda's voice filled the room crystal clear and utterly damning. The little brat thinks she's too good for Thomas, but she'll learn to appreciate what we're offering. Patricia's money will set all of us up for life, and Margaret will just have to deal with it. Robert's voice followed. If she keeps refusing, we'll just cut her off completely. Let her try to survive without family money. She'll come crawling back within 6 months, ready to marry whoever we choose. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. The casual cruelty in their voices, the complete absence of any concern for my feelings or future, was breathtaking in its callousness. There's more, Kellerman said grimly. He produced a series of email printouts. During the period when you were refusing the marriage proposal, your parents were actively working to sabotage your relationship with Patricia. The emails revealed a calculated campaign of lies. Robert had told Patricia that I'd called her a pathetic old woman desperate for family attention, and that I only visited her for money. Linda had claimed I'd stolen jewelry from Patricia's house during my last visit, a complete fabrication designed to poison any potential reconciliation. Simultaneously, Kellerman continued, they were telling you that Patricia had lost interest in maintaining a relationship. They intercepted her attempts to contact you and blocked her phone number from your cell phone account. My heart shattered as the full scope of their manipulation became clear. Patricia had been trying to reach me. She'd never rejected me at all. My parents had orchestrated our separation to prevent her from discovering their crimes and to eliminate any obstacle to their financial schemes. Ma, the arranged marriage was just the final step, Kellerman explained. Once you were married to Thomas and they had control over your inheritance prospects, they planned to have you declared financially incompetent. A medical professional they'd bribed would testify that you were too emotionally unstable to manage Patricia's legacy. Robert looked up from his hands, his face gray with defeat. We never wanted to hurt her. Everything we did was to protect the family's financial future. Whose family? I asked quietly. Because you certainly weren't protecting mine. Kellerman pulled out one final document that made my parents both flinch visibly. This is a contract between Robert Williams and Brennan Industries, Patricia's primary competitor. Robert agreed to provide them with Williams Biotech's research data in exchange for $2 million. The transfer was scheduled to occur immediately after Patricia's funeral. The betrayal went beyond stealing money or manipulating my personal life. They'd been planning to sell Patricia's life's work to her competitors, potentially destroying the company she'd built and the jobs of hundreds of employees who depended on Williams Biotech for their livelihoods. Patricia discovered this arrangement 3 weeks before her death. Hartwell said softly, "It was the final piece of evidence she needed to ensure that her company would be protected from your parents' schemes." I looked across the table at Robert and Linda, these people who had raised me and claimed to love me, and saw strangers. Criminals who had viewed me as a commodity and Patricia as a mark to be exploited. The 5 years of loneliness and struggle I'd endured hadn't been the result of my stubbornness or poor choices. It had been carefully orchestrated to facilitate their theft and manipulation. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Why destroy everything? Why hurt so many people for money?" Linda's composure finally cracked completely. Tears streamed down her carefully made-up face as she sobbed. "We just wanted security. We wanted to make sure we'd be taken care of." "You were taken care of," I replied, thinking of Patricia's generosity over the years. "You had good jobs, a beautiful house, and a family business that provided comfortable income. But that wasn't enough, was it? You wanted more." Robert raised his head, his eyes red with what might have been tears or might have been rage. "You don't understand the pressure we were under. The economy, the competition, the expectations from our social circle. We needed to secure our future. By destroying mine," I stood up, my legs shaky but my resolve crystallizing. "By stealing from a woman who trusted you, by selling out a company that employs hundreds of people." For the first time in 5 years, I felt something other than sadness when looking at my parents. I felt clarity. These weren't the people who'd raised me. Those people had been a carefully constructed facade designed to hide the manipulative criminals sitting across from me now. Patricia had seen through their deception, and she'd spent her final months ensuring that justice would be served and that I would finally understand the truth about my family. Sarah Chen closed her laptop and exchanged a meaningful look with Hartwell. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting long shadows across the conference room as we prepared for what I sensed would be the most shocking revelation yet. There's something else Patricia wanted you to know," Hartwell said, his tone carrying a weight that made everyone in the room lean forward. "Something that will change how you understand everything that's happened over the past 5 years. He withdrew a sealed video tablet from his briefcase, its screen dark, but somehow ominous. Patricia recorded this message specifically for this moment, after all the evidence had been presented. As he activated the device, my aunt's familiar face appeared on the screen. She looked thinner than I remembered, her silver hair shorter, but her eyes held the same sharp intelligence that had always made her seem younger than her 72 years. "Hello, Margaret." Patricia's voice carried clearly through the tablet speakers. "If you're watching this, then Jonathan has done his job perfectly, and you now understand the scope of your parents' betrayal." I felt tears starting to form as I heard her voice again, warm and loving, despite everything she'd been through. "But what you don't know yet is that I wasn't just a victim in this situation. I've been planning my response for the past 3 years, ever since David first brought me evidence of Robert and Linda's theft." On screen, Patricia's expression grew more serious. "You see, my dear, I haven't just been documenting crimes. I've been actively collaborating with the Federal Bureau of Investigation's White-Collar Crime Division." The words hit the room like a thunderbolt. Robert's face went completely white while Linda made a small choking sound. Agent Jennifer Morrison from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit approached me 18 months ago. Patricia continued on the recording. They'd been investigating suspicious patterns in pharmaceutical industry consulting fees, and Williams Biotech's unusual expenses had caught their attention. Hartwell paused the video and looked directly at my parents. What Patricia didn't mention is that Agent Morrison is waiting outside this conference room right now, along with a team of federal marshals. The blood drained from Linda's face so quickly I thought she might faint. Robert gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. You see, Hartwell continued, this isn't just a will reading. It's the culmination of a federal sting operation that Patricia helped orchestrate. He restarted the video and Patricia's voice filled the room again. For the past year and a half, I've been wearing recording devices during every conversation with Robert and Linda. I've documented their attempts to bribe doctors, their plans to forge medical documents declaring you mentally incompetent, and their negotiations with foreign companies interested in stealing our research. My mind reeled as I tried to process the implications. Patricia hadn't been a helpless victim at all. She'd been working undercover with law enforcement gathering evidence while pretending to be the trusting sister they'd always exploited. The declining mental state they thought they observed in me was carefully orchestrated, Patricia explained with a slight smile. FBI consultants helped me appear more confused and vulnerable than I actually was. Robert and Linda became overconfident, revealing more of their plans because they believed I was no longer capable of understanding or remembering our conversations. On screen, Patricia reached for something outside the camera's view, then held up a small electronic device. Every conversation was recorded, every bribe attempt, every plan to defraud the company, everything. Robert stood abruptly, his chair falling backward with a crash. This is entrapment. You can't record family conversations without consent. Actually, Hartwell said calmly, federal law enforcement can authorize such recordings when investigating ongoing criminal enterprises. Patricia was acting as a cooperating witness, not a private citizen. The video continued, and Patricia's expression grew more tender as she looked directly into the camera. Margaret, I also need you to know that your exile from the family was part of our plan to protect you. My heart stopped. What? The FBI was concerned that Robert and Linda might try to implicate you in their crimes or use you as leverage if the investigation became public. We needed to establish clear distance between you and their criminal activities. Tears streamed down my face as Patricia's plan became clear. My 5 years of loneliness and struggle hadn't been abandonment at all. It had been protection. I arranged for the biotech startup where you've been working to be purchased secretly by Williams Biotech's charitable trust, Patricia revealed. Every promotion you earned, every research project you completed, was building your resume for the day you would inherit this company. Sarah Chen spoke up for the first time in minutes. Patricia was remarkably thorough. She ensured that Margaret gained practical experience in pharmaceutical research while maintaining plausible distance from the family business. On screen, Patricia leaned forward, her eyes bright with affection and pride. My dear girl, you weren't rejected by your family. You were protected by someone who loves you enough to endure being seen as the villain in order to keep you safe. The video showed Patricia reaching for tissues, her own eyes moist with emotion. Robert and Linda thought they were manipulating a dying old woman who'd lost her edge. They had no idea they were confessing their crimes to someone working with federal investigators. Hartwell stood and moved toward the conference room door. Agent Morrison, we're ready for you. A professional woman in her 40s entered wearing a dark suit and carrying federal credentials. Behind her, 3 U.S. Marshals took positions around the room. Robert Williams, Linda Williams. Agent Morrison announced formally, You're under arrest for wire fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, and violation of federal racketeering statutes. As the marshals moved to handcuff my parents, Patricia's voice continued from the tablet. I'm sorry you had to see this, Margaret, but I needed you to understand that justice sometimes requires patience and careful planning. Linda sobbed as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. Margaret, please. We're still your parents. We love you. But I was listening to Patricia's final words on the recording. True family doesn't exploit or manipulate. True family protects and nurtures. Remember that as you build your new life. The marshals escorted my parents from the room, their expensive clothes and arrogant attitudes reduced to the shabby desperation of cornered criminals. For 5 years, I'd believed they'd rejected me for being stubborn and ungrateful. Now I understood they'd seen me as either a tool to be used or an obstacle to be removed. Patricia had seen it all, planned for everything, and spent her final months ensuring that justice would be served while protecting the niche she truly loved. Her greatest gift wasn't the billion-dollar company or the mansion or the money. It was the truth delivered with surgical precision at exactly the right moment to maximum impact. 3 hours later, I stood in the marble foyer of Patricia's mansion at 15 Oak Hill Drive, holding the brass keys that Hartwell had pressed into my trembling hands. The house felt enormous after my studio apartment, every room filled with memories of childhood visits and the lingering scent of Patricia's lavender perfume. I'd driven here in my 10-year-old Honda, following the GPS through neighborhoods I'd only seen from the passenger seat of my parents' luxury cars. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now the owner of a property worth more than most people earned in their entire lifetimes. The security system chirped softly as I entered, and a voice I didn't recognize spoke from hidden speakers. Welcome home, Miss Williams. I'm Commander Jackson, head of your security detail. If you need anything, just speak my name aloud. Security detail. In all the chaos of the will reading and arrests, I'd forgotten that Patricia had mentioned protective measures. Given what my parents had attempted over the years, I supposed it made sense. I was exploring the library where Patricia used to help me with chemistry homework when the front door chimed. The security monitor showed a familiar silver sedan parked in the circular driveway, and my heart sank as I recognized the figures emerging from the vehicle. Robert and Linda. Somehow they'd been released on bail. Commander Jackson. I called out, my voice shaky. Yes, Miss Williams. I see them. Federal marshals are en route, but they're still 10 minutes away. Please proceed to the safe room behind the bookshelf in the library. I'll handle this. A section of the bookshelf swung inward, revealing a small but comfortable room, equipped with monitors showing every angle of the property. Patricia had thought of everything. Through the security cameras, I watched my parents approach the front door with a third person I recognized as Thomas Murphy. He looked as desperate as they did, his expensive suit wrinkled and his usually perfect hair disheveled. The front door's intercom crackled as Robert pressed the call button. Margaret, we know you're in there. We need to talk. Commander Jackson's voice responded instead. This is private property. You're trespassing. Leave immediately or face arrest. Linda's voice rose to a shriek. She's our daughter. We have rights. Actually, you have federal charges pending and restraining orders being processed, Jackson replied calmly. Departure is strongly advised. But instead of leaving, I watched Thomas Murphy produce a crowbar from the trunk of their car. They weren't here to talk. They were here to force me to sign documents that would transfer the inheritance back to them. Miss Williams. Jackson's voice came through the safe room's intercom. Your parents have brought forged power of attorney documents. Mr. Murphy has medical sedatives that appear to have been obtained illegally. They're planning to drug you and force your signature on legal papers. The scope of their desperation was breathtaking. Even after being arrested, even knowing federal investigators had years of evidence against them, they were still trying to steal Patricia's legacy. Through the monitors, I watched them break down the front door with shocking efficiency. They'd clearly planned this carefully, probably believing they could overpower whatever security an old woman might have installed. What they encountered instead was Commander Jackson and his team of former military personnel emerging from concealed positions throughout the house, like something out of an action movie. Patricia hadn't just hired security guards, she'd assembled a tactical response unit. Federal crime in progress. Jackson spoke into his radio. Suspects are committing breaking and entering, attempting kidnapping and possession of controlled substances with intent to commit assault. Thomas Murphy tried to run, but was tackled in the foyer by a man built like a professional linebacker. Linda collapsed in hysterics as flex cuffs were applied to her wrists. Robert stood in the destroyed doorway, looking around at Patricia's beautiful home with an expression of pure rage. "She owes us," he screamed at the cameras he knew I was watching through. "We raised her, we fed her and clothed her and put her through school. She belongs to us." "Miss Williams." Commander Jackson's voice was gentle through the intercom. "Would you like to address your parents before the federal agents arrive?" I stared at the monitors, watching these three people who'd planned to drug me and force me to sign away my inheritance. The parents who'd claimed to love me while systematically destroying my credit, my relationships, and my future prospects. I pressed the intercom button. "Robert, Linda, you spent 5 years telling me I was worthless without your money. You threw me out because I wouldn't let you sell me to pay your debts. You called me stupid and ungrateful and said I'd never amount to anything." My voice grew stronger as I continued. "But Patricia saw something in me that you never bothered to look for. She saw potential instead of profit. She saw a human being instead of a commodity. And she spent her final years protecting me from people who claimed to be my family but treated me like property." Linda sobbed louder, her carefully applied makeup streaking down her face. "We're sorry we made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can be a real family." "We were never a real family," I replied, the truth finally crystal clear. "A real family doesn't forge signatures or destroy credit ratings or try to drug their children for money. A real family protects and supports each other." Federal agents poured through the broken doorway led by Agent Morrison from the afternoon's will reading. She looked grimly satisfied as she surveyed the scene. Conspiracy to commit kidnapping, breaking and entering possession of controlled substances, and violation of federal bail conditions, she announced to the security cameras. This should add several years to whatever sentences they receive for the financial crimes. Thomas Murphy was placed in a separate vehicle from my parents. Through the monitors, I could see him trying to negotiate with the agents, probably offering to testify against Robert and Linda in exchange for reduced charges. As the convoy of federal vehicles disappeared down Oak Hill Drive, Commander Jackson knocked softly on the safe room door. He was a compact man in his 50s, with kind eyes and the bearing of someone accustomed to protecting people from their worst nightmares. "It's over, Miss Williams. They can't hurt you anymore." I emerged from the safe room on unsteady legs, looking at the damage they'd done to Patricia's front door. Even after everything, even knowing they were criminals, some part of me had hoped they might show some genuine remorse or recognition of what they'd done wrong. Instead, they'd proven beyond any doubt that they saw me as property to be reclaimed, not a daughter to be loved and protected. "Patricia knew this might happen," Commander Jackson said softly. "She left instructions for exactly this scenario. Your parents' desperation would eventually override their caution." I walked through Patricia's house, my house now, thinking about the woman who'd anticipated every move in this complex chess game. She'd protected me even from beyond the grave, ensuring that when my parents revealed their true nature, there would be witnesses and evidence and consequences. For the first time in 5 years, I felt truly safe. Not just physically, but emotionally. The people who'd spent decades manipulating and exploiting me would face justice, and I was finally free to build a life based on truth instead of lies. 6 months after that terrible and wonderful day in Hartwell's conference room, I stood in the corner office of Williams Biotech Industries, watching the sunrise paint Chicago's skyline in shades of gold and pink. The view from the 42nd floor still took my breath away, a daily reminder of how dramatically my life had changed. Robert and Linda were serving concurrent federal sentences of 12 to 15 years in minimum security prisons. The judge had been particularly harsh, given their attempts to kidnap me after posting bail. Thomas Murphy received 8 years for his role in the conspiracy, though his cooperation with prosecutors had helped recover additional stolen funds. But the most surprising development had come 3 months ago, when Patricia's lawyers contacted me about another family member I never knew existed. Emma Rodriguez had been working as a pediatric surgeon in San Antonio, completely unaware that her biological father was Robert Williams. I'd driven to Texas to meet her, nervous about how she'd react to learning about our connection and the criminal family she'd never known. What I found was a brilliant 30-year-old woman with Robert's eyes, but none of his cruelty, raised by a loving stepfather who'd given her his surname and his values. Patricia sent me through medical school, Emma had explained over coffee in San Antonio's Riverwalk district. Anonymous scholarships that covered everything from tuition to living expenses. I always wondered who my benefactor was. Now Emma was relocating to Chicago to head Williams Biotech's new pediatric research division. We'd discovered an easy friendship based on shared values, rather than blood relations. She was the sister I'd always wanted, the family member who chose connection over exploitation. Together, we'd established the Patricia Williams Foundation, providing full scholarships for students from broken or abusive families who wanted to pursue careers in medical research. Our first class of 20 scholars would begin their studies next fall, young people who understood what it meant to overcome family dysfunction through education and determination. The pharmaceutical company itself was thriving under new leadership. I'd promoted several longtime employees who'd been overlooked during the years when Robert and Linda's cronies held key positions. Dr. Amanda Foster, Patricia's former research director, had become my closest advisor and friend. She'd known Patricia for 20 years and shared countless stories about the woman who'd built this empire through intelligence and integrity. Patricia always said the best leaders were made in the worst circumstances, Amanda had told me during my first overwhelming week as CEO. She believed struggle taught empathy, and empathy made better business decisions. That philosophy had guided every change we'd implemented. Williams Biotech now offered the most generous employee benefits package in the pharmaceutical industry. We'd reduced prices on essential medications by 40%, focusing on sustainable profits rather than maximum extraction. The stock price had actually increased as investors recognized the long-term value of ethical business practices. My personal life was rebuilding as well. The credit damage Robert and Linda had inflicted took months to repair, but Hartwell's legal team had worked tirelessly to document the identity theft and restore my financial reputation. I'd moved from Patricia's mansion into a comfortable downtown condominium, keeping the family home as a retreat where I could feel connected to the woman who'd saved my life. Most importantly, I was learning to trust my own judgment again. 5 years of believing I was the problem in my family had left me doubting my perceptions and decisions. Therapy with Dr. Sarah Martinez. a specialist in family trauma, was helping me understand the difference between healthy relationships and manipulative ones. Your parents trained you to accept blame for their choices, Dr. Martinez had explained during one of our sessions. Recovery means learning to trust your instincts about people's motivations. Those instincts had led me to hire Commander Jackson's security firm permanently. Not because I lived in fear, but because I'd learned the importance of protecting myself from people who might see my success as an opportunity for exploitation. Patricia's lesson about the difference between family and blood relatives had become central to how I approached all relationships. The morning sun climbed higher over Chicago as I prepared for another board meeting. Williams Biotech was launching a new initiative to provide free medications to underserved communities, funded by the foundation Emma and I had created. It was the kind of work Patricia would have loved, using business success to address social problems. My assistant knocked softly on the office door. "Miss Williams, the board members are ready for you." I straightened my jacket and gathered my presentation materials. The scared, confused young woman who'd walked into that law office 6 months ago felt like a different person. I'd learned that real strength came not from never being hurt, but from choosing how to respond when people tried to hurt you. As I walked toward the boardroom where Patricia had once made the decisions that built this company, I thought about the letter I'd found in her desk drawer just last week. It was addressed to me, but dated 5 years ago, written shortly after my parents had thrown me out. "My dearest Margaret," it had said, "someday you'll understand that the people who reject us often give us the greatest gift of all, the freedom to become who we're meant to be, rather than who they need us to be." Patricia had been right about everything. The pain of family rejection had taught me to value authentic relationships over convenient ones. The struggle of building a life without family money had shown me my own capabilities. The years of loneliness had prepared me to appreciate genuine connection when I found it. Now, leading the company Patricia had built and continuing her legacy of ethical business practices, I understood her final lesson. Success wasn't about accumulating wealth or power over others. It was about using whatever advantages you had to make life better for people who needed help. The strongest trees grow in the deepest storms, she'd written in that final letter. I'd survived the storm, learned from it, and emerged stronger than I'd ever imagined possible. Real family, I'd discovered, wasn't about blood relationships or legal obligations. It was about people who chose to support your growth rather than exploit your vulnerabilities. People like Patricia, who'd seen potential in a confused young woman and spent years nurturing it. Like Emma, who'd embraced sisterhood based on shared values rather than genetic connections. Like Amanda and the other colleagues who'd welcomed me into leadership roles I'd never thought I deserved. Standing outside the boardroom, I took a deep breath and smiled. Patricia's plan had worked perfectly. Justice had been served, truth had been revealed, and I was finally free to build the life I'd always wanted. A life based on authentic relationships, meaningful work, and the knowledge that real worth came from character, not circumstances. The future stretched ahead, full of possibilities I was only beginning to imagine. And for the first time in my adult life, I was excited to discover what came next. Have you ever had to overcome betrayal from people you trusted most? How do you think family relationships should be based on love and respect, rather than financial obligations? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this story if it resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming family drama and building authentic relationships. And please share this with anyone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by how others treat them. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember that sometimes the most painful experiences lead us exactly where we need to be. Your story isn't over, and the best chapters might still be ahead of you. Eh,